All right, we are in Ecclesiastes chapter 10 tonight. Ecclesiastes chapter 10, not too far away from finishing up the book of Ecclesiastes. And this particular chapter is going to be one that's a little more challenging for me to preach, just the way my brain works. I prefer either expository preaching or topical preaching. I like preaching through chapters in kind of an expository method. I enjoy that. I like topical preaching too, but with a chapter like this is much like Proverbs, where it's just going to give several different kind of random advices of wisdom, and so you have to keep switching topics. And so I'm preaching through the chapter, but at the same time I'm going to feel like I'm jumping all over the place with topics. So it might start to feel like a camp meeting message where I'm just kind of up here just talking about whatever pops in my head. But it will be inspired, whatever pops in my head, by these passages because they are there. This chapter is very much like the book of Proverbs. Same author, Solomon, is writing it, and in a lot of ways, each verse, or maybe a few verses at a time, they're all kind of one subject, but the overall message that we're going to see is basically showing how wisdom is better than folly. So we're kind of just giving several examples that it is. Wisdom is better than folly. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And he's just going to give several examples. And we don't use that term folly a whole lot, but folly, it's the state or quality of being foolish. Lack of understanding or sense, a foolish action, practice, idea, absurdity. Okay? And the reality is, the book of Proverbs that talks a lot about these things, it's geared towards young men. Why is that? I mean, in reality, who are the most foolish people, if we're going to broad brush? Young men. I mean, more than girls, for sure. And women can be foolish too. But, boys, bless their hearts, they go through these stages where they're just naturally dumb. They do a lot of foolish things. And, that's okay. It's pretty normal as long as they're growing out of it, okay? But sometimes, they'll take it into their adult years, and they can get themselves in a lot more trouble. Which, the solution, the rod of reproof. That wisdom is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of reproof shall drive it far from him. Hopefully I quoted that right. But either way, they got to learn that. And they're going to learn. Some of the lessons they will learn is going to be because you taught them the lesson through a good old-fashioned spanking. Sometimes they're going to learn just because of circumstances and consequences. But at the same time, the quicker we can learn these things, the easier we can learn these things, the better. And so we're going to hit several different things here that it mentions. And so in verse 1, he says, dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor. So doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor. And so this ointment of the apothecary that it mentions, the whole point of it, it's a good thing. It's something that's made to smell good. It's a fragrance. It's meant to just give a pleasing smell. I mean, how many ladies you have fragrance things around your house? Okay, what's the point? Okay, just things smelling good is nice, isn't it? It gives you a good feeling when you walk in somewhere and it smells good. That is the point of those things. But if dead flies get inside that good smelling thing, all of a sudden it produces a nasty smell. In fact, it can almost be worse. I think a good way to apply this today, I experienced this a lot when I was a youth director. Again, we're going to talk about teenage boys, okay? But teenage boys, I remember when Axe body spray got big. And it was like teenagers thought, now we don't have to shower anymore. And one of the most horrific smells is going into a room where there's a bunch of teenage boys with BO, but that's covered by Axe body spray. Okay, now Axe body spray smells pretty good by itself, but when you mix in BO with it, it makes it worse. It's like worse than just regular BO smell. And so, I don't know, anybody ever experienced that before? I mean, does anybody's boys or husband do that kind of thing? It's just, Jason's raising his hand. He was a participant in that kind of thing back in the day. And so, again, these fragrances they serve a purpose, but when you insert something like that fly in there, it messes it up and it makes it worse. And so this is why we just can't ignore sin, that sin destroys a lot of good. You know, you can be doing all these good things, but then when you add some sin to it, it just kind of messes everything up. And in some ways, it's almost worse. For example, okay, anytime a terrible crime is committed, it's always bad, isn't it? A murder is a terrible thing. Theft is a terrible thing. But when it's somebody who's supposed to be good, when it's somebody like a pastor, when it's a well, we all expect it from politicians now, when it's supposed to be a police officer, when it's supposed to be somebody in a position of leadership, when it's somebody who's in a place of trust, somebody who's known for doing good things, and then they do a crime, it's actually worse. It creates a greater scandal. It does more harm than just a drunkard doing some kind of thing. You expect bad things from a drunkard, but you expect good things, you know, from somebody who is in a certain type of position. And so again, you know, I think what Solomon's trying to do here is he's trying to just point out how, hey, when you have something that's made for good, something that's supposed to serve a good purpose, when you add sin to it, when you add folly to it, when foolishness gets added to it, it messes up all that good. And so you tell these kids, it's like you tell these boys, hey, you stink, you need to take a shower. And they're like, I used Axe. Doesn't matter. You need to take a shower. You've got to wash away the stink. You can't just add a good thing, a good smell to it, and it's going to go away. And it's like that in the religious world too. You know, often people who have major sins, they refuse to repent of it. It's like, hey, you shouldn't be doing this kind of thing. And then what do they want to do? They want to talk about their good thing they do. Well, I go to church. I've been baptized. I go soul winning. I do whatever. Therefore, you can't talk. But it almost makes it worse. You know, it makes, and I'm not saying the good thing doesn't become worse, but no, the bad thing you're doing becomes worse because now you're telling me you're this hardcore, sold out soul winner, and you're still doing all this nonsense? That, you know what? That sin now seems to be worse because you should be somebody who knows better. And so you can keep spraying the Axe body spray all over your stink. But now it's just, I associate Axe body spray with teenage boy B.O. because I just experienced that smell so many times. And it's just a horrid thing. And that's how it is for many people today. You've got all these people out there, they get triggered by church. They get triggered by anything they associate with church. Why? Because they went to a church and they had a terrible experience. And it's like, hey, that terrible thing that happened to you, that wasn't Christianity. That's not what is supposed to happen. They went against the Bible. But the problem is that place where they were also taught standards, where they were taught purity, where they were taught all these things about God, is also the place where they went and they were taken advantage of. And now all that good that they were taught, to them, it all stinks. They hate all of it. And the internet is full of people out there who, many of them had legitimate wrongs done to them in church, and now they hate everything about church. Why? What was it? Because there was something wrong in that ointment of the apothecary? Well, the ointment of the apothecary, that was good. Church, in its purest form, is good. When it's doing what it's supposed to do, is good. But when you add those dead flies into it, it just all stinks. And that's a shame, and that's why, as a church, we want to keep ourselves pure on these things. If we have some kind of problem in our church, if we have some kind of sin going on in the church, you know what the solution is? It's not add more soul winning. The solution is get rid of the sin. That's what we actually need to do. Otherwise, we're going to start to make the soul winning stink. Because we've got if we have people getting hurt and we're justifying it because we go soul winning, they're just going to start hating that too. And that's not right. We don't want to do that kind of thing. So that's verse 1. But then in Ecclesiastes 9:18, one of the things that he had said in just the previous chapter, in fact, it was the last verse of chapter 9, right before he mentions this dead flies thing, he said, wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroyeth much good. I mean, and think about, too, people who are out there today who have negative stereotypes associated with them. I mean, how many Muslims have actually blown people up? There's billions of Muslims, right? But again, I mean, it's a lot of them, but what's the percentage? I don't know. But at the same time, too, people to this day, if you get on an airplane, there's Muslims, everybody watches them closer. Why? Because a few have made them stink, especially back during 9/11. And you have people out there like that. I was watching a thing one time, and there was some terrible thing that had happened. And I forgot who it was, but it was a conservative black guy. And he was just like, please tell me it wasn't a brother. And it was a brother. And he was just so upset by it. And I'm the same way too. Whenever I hear there's some pastor got arrested or something, I'm like, please don't be a Baptist. Please don't be a Baptist. And if it is a Baptist, I'm like, please don't be somebody I know. Please don't be somebody I know. And I'm always comforted if it's somebody I don't know. And I always feel better too if it's not a Baptist. Why? Because sometimes those few, they make us all stink. You want to build a good reputation, but that one sinner destroys much good. And it really is a shame how that works, but it's just the reality. And so verse 2 of Ecclesiastes 10 says, a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart at his left. Now, that verse by itself can be somewhat mysterious, but I think the next verse can help us understand what he's saying. He says, yea, also, when he that is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him. And he saith to everyone that he is a fool. So, like I said, Ecclesiastes, a lot of the way things are worded can be a little confusing. But back in that time, something we see in the scriptures too, that something being on your right hand, it showed it was in a place of prominence. To be seated at the right hand of someone, that was a higher honor than it was to be seated at the left hand of somebody. That was the custom that they had back then. And so I think here when he's saying that a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is at his left, I think what he's trying to show here is that the wise man, he's going to have wisdom in a place of prominence, where the fool, he's going to be, the foolishness is going to be in a place of prominence. His wisdom's going to fail him when he's walking by the way. He's going to be telling everybody that he's a fool. All the things that he's doing, you're screaming to everybody that you are a fool, that you are all about foolishness. And it's like, and have you ever watched these videos before of people who just do dumb stuff to get hurt pretty much just for clicks? Okay, now how many of you all watch that stuff sometimes? Okay, I see several hands, mainly guys. And, we are contributing to their downfall. Because they do these things for clicks. They do these things for attention. And sometimes it's entertaining to watch people be stupid and just do dumb things to get hurt. Okay? But, when you watch these things, it's like, how dumb can they be? And they're basically just screaming that we're dumb. It's already embarrassing enough if you're just dumb. But to just display it, to flaunt it, to just make it a part of who you are, for it to be what you're known for, okay? I mean, and I'm sorry, every time I see the video from Pain Rankers where they're taking the extension cord to each other, I laugh so hard at that because it's just like, you watch them do that and it hurts them so bad, but it's like they did it on purpose. It's like, and they do that kind of stuff, again, just for clicks, and it's hilarious. But you know what? Imagine if that was your son. Imagine if that was somebody connected to you. You would be really embarrassed by that kind of thing because they're just telling everybody they're a fool. But those who prioritize wisdom, they're going to reveal this to all, by their actions. You're going to say, hey, this is a wise person. This person does smart things. And so, in fact, whatever we prioritize in our life, everybody can see it. You can just observe people and you find out what their priorities are. We all reveal our priorities with the lifestyle that we live. Those who prioritize wisdom, it's there. It's ready when they need it. People who just in their day-to-day life, in their walk, are always prioritizing wisdom. They have it at their right hand. Those people, it's like whenever challenges come, they're going to do fine. Whenever they're trying to make decisions, it's the same thing too with your kids. When your kids are growing up, you're observing them as a parent. And, hopefully you're seeing wisdom when they do that. And if you have a child who makes wise decisions, you're going to feel better whenever it comes time for big decisions. When it comes like choosing a spouse, when it comes to, choosing a job, And so the thing is too, with my boys, whenever they started finding interest in women, I was always glad that they weren't coming to me asking about some floozy that was out there. I was always pleased with ones that they showed interest in, because it's like, all right, maybe they're going to do all right, and we're happy with what they did. They were showing wisdom, that they were showing that was a priority, and I'm thankful for that. It gives you comfort, because you want to know they're going to do all right as an adult. You don't want to worry about them. But sometimes people, they have that foolish child that just, the spankings just never seem to take effect, never seem to drive that foolishness out of them. And they're worried about when they become an adult. They worry about the decisions they're going to make. And because they've just shown a pattern throughout their life of what their priorities are. And I remember years ago, a guy I knew was very concerned about his son, because he was, and listen, I've always enjoyed video games, but he was pretty obsessed with video games. And it was a situation where it was a divorce, and so he didn't have a lot of say when it came to certain things, because a lot of stuff would get decided in court. And so when it came to college, the way the laws work, and it's good for everybody to know this too, in case you're thinking about getting divorced. You can realize just how bad of an idea it is. But whenever you get divorced, according to the law, this is what I was told, your children are not supposed to experience any kind of disadvantage because of that divorce, which is going to be very difficult, because it's going to cost you a ton financially, but it's not supposed to affect the kid. Well, and in this guy's case, the divorce, it affected him very much financially, but he legally was not allowed to make his son pay for it. And so his son and his mother, both agreed that, he wanted to go to college to learn how to make video games. And of course, the dad was not real excited about that, but he didn't really have a choice. And he was paying a fortune. And then I remember I was with him one day when he saw his son's report card. And he's like, I'm paying this much money for those kind of grades just so we can learn how to play more video games? I mean, he was ticked. He was upset. But you know what? At the same time, it was one of those things, we all saw it coming. And I think the dad saw it coming too, but it was one of those things that marriage fell apart, and he just kind of lost all control of things. And it was a real shame. And I don't know whatever happened to him. I lost contact with him years ago. But again, people do. They show those patterns, and watch those things in your kids. You got to teach them wisdom is better than folly. You need to let them see those who are rewarded for their wisdom. Get them to desire wisdom. You need to point out those who receive the reward of the fool, and you need to let them know that's where they're heading if they do foolish things. So verse 4, he says, if the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place, for yielding pacifieth great offenses. And I believe right here, this is just giving some wisdom, showing how to stay in good graces with authority, again, if it is all possible. And we were just talking before church, and I said, if the cops ever tried to make me take one of those tests to see if you're drunk, I would have a bad attitude about that. Because again, when you've gone 45 years alcohol-free, I don't ever want anybody to even think I'm drunk. And so to me, if a cop ever thought I needed to take one of those tests, I would just find it insulting. And I don't think I would be able to stop myself from being a jerk. But the problem with that, I'm probably going to not yield great offense. I'm probably going to cause great offense. Because he's going to have the power, and he's probably going to make me do more stuff just to embarrass me and humiliate me. It'll probably make things worse. But again, we all hate the authoritarian Barney Fife types, but sometimes just showing them a little respect can make your life a whole lot easier. You probably shouldn't mess with people who have the power to cause great problems for you. It would be wise in most cases to just cooperate. And I get it. Okay, I'm one of those people. If I don't like the situation, I don't want to cooperate. And I developed a very bad attitude with this kind of thing back during COVID. When we were getting pushed to do all kinds of nonsense, I developed a very bad attitude towards what I perceive as dumb rules. And I don't know if I've ever fully gotten over it. Fortunately, nobody's tried to make me do anything dumb in a long time. But even the other day when we were in the hospital and they gave us the masks, we're in a hospital, but we still were like, oh, I don't want to wear these. And we didn't put them on, and nobody yelled at us after that. But it's just like, if COVID had never happened, I probably would have put it on and wouldn't have asked another question. But after COVID, it's like, I'm not putting on a mask. It's like, yeah, but you're in a hospital, there's sick people. I want my freedom, right? And so, again, but, I don't want to relive all that stuff. But either way, we need to watch these things and show wisdom when it comes to these things. And I'll say this too, when we started the church, I came from a church that was out in the country. When it came to a lot of zoning things, there wasn't much stuff that we had to deal with because of where the church was. When we started the church over here, we bought a building that was in town, and I was not expecting all the annual inspections and things that they had to do. And I remember when we first bought, we had bought the building, we owned it, and then all of a sudden, the city contacts me, yeah, we got to come by and do a fire code inspection, and then there was this other electrical thing they had to do. I'm just like, we don't need you. I'm thinking, we don't need you to do this. And it's like, no, we're okay, we don't need anything. And they're like, no, it's required. I'm like, what? I wasn't used to that. And I started to have an attitude with it, and then I went over to the city of Rock Falls. I had to go over there for some reason. I don't remember why. And I was talking to the lady over there, and I'm trying to think of a diplomatic way to say this. But she kind of was acting like what I pictured Adolf Hitler's secretary acting like. It was just, and I remember I got really aggravated, and I almost said something. I was like, don't say anything. And I was kind, I was respectful, I cooperated. And the first time I was there, she had a major attitude at first, I think, because she saw us questioning things. But I stopped myself, and after I'd been there sometimes, she ended up becoming very nice. And it was very kind, and the city was very, very good with us. There was a lot of stuff that was not up to code when we bought the building, and technically they could have made us do a bunch of stuff that we did not have the money for, and they were super cooperative. They gave us all the time we needed. They didn't give us any grief. And you know what? I was glad, that I don't know, it must have been the Holy Spirit forcing me against my will. Again, I'm not a Calvinist where God is like our puppet master, but I almost think that happened because I don't normally cooperate with stuff like that. But I did, and the city has always been very good to us, and I'm very thankful for that, because the reality is, had I acted in my own spirit like I wanted to, and something stopped me, then they could have caused us a lot of grief. A lot of great expense and things that we weren't ready for. So that's why it's good to be cooperative sometimes. When people have the power to mess you up and give you a difficult time, you should probably just try to show a little bit of respect, and it'll make your life easier. So verse 5, he says, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, as an error which proceedeth from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. I have seen servants upon horses, and princes walking as servants upon the earth. And I think what he's pointing out here, the way he's speaking here, is similar to what we saw in Ecclesiastes chapter 6. In verse 1, he says, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men. And then he goes on to explain a lot of things that just seem backwards. It's like the way we would expect things to be. He's saying, I'm seeing the opposite here. Why are the servants riding the horses and the princes are on foot? That's typically, it's supposed to be the other way around. Everything seems backwards. Both of these things that he mentions seem to be opposite of what we'd expect to see. You've got a ruler where it seems like he's promoting foolishness. Folly is set in great dignity. That's not right. Have you ever looked at our rulers? It seems like they're promoting the worst of the worst, the scum of the earth, the lowlives. It's like everything seems backwards. If you have a politician that's like a good, clean, decent, moral person, he hasn't got a chance. And that's how it is in our state too, by the way, when it comes to governor. And be praying for that. But it seems like everything's backwards when it comes to these things. It's the one that have the big scandals. It's the one that's got all the corruption. They're the ones that always seem to rise to the top. That doesn't seem right. And again, sometimes rulers, they lift up and they honor the wrong people. They put fools in places of high power. But then you see those who should be princes living as servants. And a lot of times it's because of bad policy. I remember one time somebody sent me a video. I don't remember the specifics of it, but it was about whatever political issue was going on. And I remember I was watching that video, and it was kind of a longer video. The guy on there was boring, monotone, no personality. He was like a robot. Super boring to listen to, but I paid attention to what he said, and I'm like, everything that he just explained makes sense. It was like, now this complex economical issue, I get it. I understand it. I'm like, why aren't people like this actually the ones leading our country? Why aren't people like this actually our senators and congressmen and people like that? But no, you know who it always is? It's the dynamic personalities. It's the charismatic individuals. You know, people that are as dumb as the rest of us that know how to resonate with us. But it's like, you know, I feel like we should probably put people like that in charge of things. We should probably have people like this, you know, writing the bills that Congress has and setting economic policy. But no, what do we have today? And look at who we have in Congress today. It's all these colorful personalities. You know, you've got your AOCs and Marjorie Taylor Greens and Lauren Boeberts and people like that. You know, you get that just, there are these noticeable personalities. You know, your Bernie Sanders, you know, people who look like characters from a TV sitcom. And it's just like, why can't we just get some normal, boring people? That's who we actually need running this country. But nope, we get the entertaining characters. We get the people who just know how to make a speech, but in reality, they know how to read a teleprompter with some personality. And this is definitely a problem in our country. But verse 8, he goes on to say, he that diggeth a pit shall fall into it, and whoso breaketh an hedge, a serpent shall bite him. Whoso removeth stones shall be hurt therewith, and he that cleaveth wood shall be endangered thereby. And I think what it's saying here, it's if you're the person that's creating problems or you're creating dangerous situations, then those things are going to eventually end up hurting you. You know, if you're that guy who, you know, maybe you are the builder, but you like to take shortcuts, you know, to save a little bit of money, you're probably going to be the one the building's going to fall on. You know, you're eventually, whatever it is that, you know, you were kind of behind that you were doing, it's going to come back on you. It's going to end up hurting you. You thought you were getting away with something. You thought maybe you were causing a problem for somebody else, but eventually that problem is going to come back on you. And that's why when it comes to our life, how we just operate from day to day, we ought to do the right thing. Again, not just because it's the right thing, not even just because God, but again, things typically have a way of just coming back on us, you know, creating a problem for us later. And so whatever we do, we ought to do things the right way. We ought to do things how we would want them done for us. That's just a good rule of thumb. And if you live by that kind of thing, not only is that the right thing to do, that's just wisdom. That's wisdom, understanding that this is going to, in some way, come back on me if I'm doing the right thing. And so, you know what? I'm not going to go dig in a pit, you know, that's going to create a hazard for somebody else. Eventually, I might be the one that falls into that pit. And so we've got to watch out for that kind of thing. And so, verse 10, if the iron be blunt, and he do not whet the edge, then must he put to more strength. But wisdom is profitable to direct. And I think this is a great principle here, showing that if we don't use proper tools, or if we don't make proper preparation when it comes to using those tools, it's just going to create more effort trying to accomplish the same task. If you go out there and you're going to go chop firewood, that's a lot of work. But if you're too lazy to just go and stop and take some time to just sharpen the axe or whatever, get everything ready properly, you're just going to have to swing that much harder. You're going to have to swing the axe that many more times because you didn't make proper preparations. And this is something I've seen a lot too. When I worked in the Christian school, I saw this a lot, where you would have kids, they would just get lazy on their schoolwork and they would try taking shortcuts, and it always ended up creating more work for them later. And I've worked with people like that who've tried taking shortcuts, and it just created more work later. You know what? This is a great principle here. If the iron be blunt, you do not wet the edge. You got to get that axe ready for operation. We want to work smarter, not harder. That's a very important thing. And there are people out there who are very hard workers, but they're also very foolish workers. And Jason will know who I'm talking about, but I remember when I started working out the distribution center, there was this one individual that I worked with, hardest worker in the building. Hardest worker in the building. And I remember I was being trained, and the guy who was training me, he was walking me around, and we stopped and we observed this guy for a little bit. And this guy, I mean, he is running around like a maniac doing his order filling. I mean, he was working fast, he was working hard, and he said, "That so-and-so right there, he's the hardest worker in this place and pulls a 95% every day." And he said, he's like, that's just how he does it. He's been working here for years, and he pulls a 95% every day, and he works harder than anybody in this building. And then he takes me to another guy. We start observing him, and that guy looks like he's not working that hard. He's being lazy, but at the same, or he looked like he was being lazy to me after watching the one guy, and it's like, he pulls 130% every day. Well, and he said, because he works smarter. And they did. He showed that, you know, and I learned that over the years too. I remember the first week that I did that job, I was like, they had a progression that you would do. You didn't have to work to get to 100% until you'd been there for several weeks. I forgot how many it was. But I remember the first week, I'm like, I'm getting 100% the first week. And I don't know, I guess I just wanted to prove it to myself and everybody else. I was awesome. And I did. I worked like a maniac that week. And I did. I pulled 100% working like a maniac. By the time I ended that job, like if I was just in a bad mood and did not want to do more than 100%, I had to be lazy and goof off to pull that low. It was hard for me to pull as low as 100% when it came to that job, because I just learned how to do things in a way that made it easier, and that's how it was for most people there. And that's an important thing, that, you know, you learn how to work smarter, you know, not just harder. And somebody's probably heard this before. It's credited to being Bill Gates who said this. I don't know if I don't know that he's the one it came from, but he used to always say too that he chooses lazy people for hard jobs because they will always find an easy way to get the job done. And it is true. There are people out there that have been very creative, effective people. Why? Just because they were determined to not work hard. And they were going to figure out a way to get the job done without a lot of effort. And those are innovative people. Not because they're trying to make the world a better place, because they're trying to make their life easier. And you know what? I guess there's nothing wrong with that, you know? Again, so what's the point of just working hard if you're just spinning your wheels? If you're not really accomplishing anything. And so verse 11 says, "Surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, and a babbler is no better." And this verse right here by itself is also difficult to understand, but I think the next verses help give us an idea what he's saying. Because I think this verse about the serpent without enchantment is tied to these next few verses that are all about the words of man. And while you never know when a serpent is going to bite, right? The babbler who can't control his speech at any time, he can hurt you with his words in an unexpected time, I think is what he's trying to say there. And so notice what he says in verse 12. He says, "The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of the fool will swallow up himself. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is mischievous madness. A fool also is full of words. A man cannot tell what shall be and what shall be after him. Who can tell him?" So when it comes to the fool, you can never really understand the person, because again, one day they might sound nice, but the next day they sound like a maniac. One day they're saying all these good, nice things. They're saying things that are helpful. They're going to build you up, but the next day they're just going to tear you down. They're like that serpent that you never know when it's going to strike. And there's people out there that are like that. Sometimes they just say too much, and it's like they're doing good one day, and then just out of nowhere they'll say something that'll just completely wreck your day. And that is a foolish person, you know. And it is. We need to learn to have the wisdom to know what to say. We need to learn to have the wisdom to know when to just not say anything. And unfortunately, the fool, they just say whatever's on their mind. And sometimes it might be good things. Sometimes it might be helpful things. Sometimes it might be very negative things. And we've just got to learn to have wisdom and make sure, we know when to open our mouth and when to just keep it shut. So he goes on to say, the labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them, because he knoweth not how to go to the city. And it is a very stressful situation depending on a fool for anything. Have you ever worked with somebody before where you needed them to get a job done, but yet it created great stress for you when you assigned them to do whatever that job was, because you're like, I'll bet it's not going to get done. And there's people out there that, and we've all been in situations before where we had no choice but to depend on somebody who is not dependable. That's never a good thing. And we all ought to want to be somebody that if we are asked to do something, at your job especially, if your boss asks you to do something, he ought to immediately, when he comes to you and says, I need you to do this project, in his mind, project is complete. Whatever he is responsible for, in his mind, it's getting done because he assigned you to do it. You know what you're doing. You get the job done. You do things right. That needs to be what we all shoot for. We ought to be people that others can trust in, that they can depend on, they can count on. There's been people in the past that, in our old church, I remember there were certain individuals that I had to work with. When it came to, for example, with music. Okay? I used to do Brother Elijah's job. Was not as good as he was at it. But I used to do the choir. I used to arrange all the special music and things like that. And there were certain individuals that if I put them on the list to do a special, I always had a backup ready. You know why? Because I could count on them letting me down. And they usually did. Now, there were other people, if I asked them, I knew, I'm good, I'm covered, I can count on these people, but I can't tell you how many times I had situations like that, and it drove me nuts. It absolutely drove me crazy. And you don't want to be that kind of person. It's not good, but it's stressful depending on a fool for anything. So verse 16, woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a child, and thy princes eat in the morning. Blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in due season for strength, and not for drunkenness. And here he's saying in verse 16, it's a terrible thing when you have someone in charge who doesn't have wisdom, he doesn't understand what's going on. That is going to be a frustrating thing. And so if you imagine having a child as a king. We've never experienced that unless you count childish behavior from presidents and things like that. But even with that, we've got other things with checks and balances and stuff like that. We don't really have to worry about this, but imagine being a part of a country that is actually being ruled and governed by a king that is a child. And in the Bible, we see there were some good kings as children. And you know why? Because they had good advisors. And those children showed great wisdom when they followed that counsel. But imagine a child just being a child and ruling things. That would be a terrifying thing if that happened. Notice also the princes eat in the morning. Hey, what's that talking about? Well, it's also a terrible thing if the leadership is just getting fat off the backs of people they are supposed to be serving. They're feeding themselves first before they take care of the kingdom. Before they're doing their duties as princes, they're just making sure they're getting what they want. Reminds me of our politicians. That they get in office, and what always happens when they get in office? They get richer, the nation gets poorer. That's not how these things are supposed to be. What should happen, the princes and the nobles, they should eat in due season for strength and not for drunkenness. We want our princes to eat. We want our rulers to, we want our leaders to be taken care of, but we don't really want them getting rich off our backs. We don't, again, I don't think our congressmen and people like that, we ought to make them go live in poverty. I think we ought to take care of those people, but good night. Do we have to make them all multimillionaires? It doesn't really seem right, especially when they're doing a bad job governing. It's a shame when you see that kind of thing, but it happens a lot. No, they need to make sure they take care of the kingdom first, and they do. They're going to eat, but again, for strength. We all have to have that. You know, we need them in good condition to be able to serve, but they're not doing it for drunkenness. They're not doing it just to fulfill their lustful appetites or anything like that. But unfortunately, that is the way it has been in many governments throughout history. And it's a terrible thing when that happens. Verse 18, by much slothfulness, the building decayeth, and through idleness of the hands, the house droppeth through. And when you do things in a lazy way, you might finish the job early, but it's not going to last. You know, are we doing the job to get the job done, or are we doing it to last? Are we building a building to say we built a building, or are we building a building to last? And we need to take those things into consideration. We don't want things falling apart. It's not to anyone's benefit. He says, a feast, in verse 19, is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. And this is kind of interesting what he's saying here, but while a feast and wine, they bring very specific pleasures. If you have money, you can get whatever pleasure you choose. Because like I said, a feast, it only pleases your appetite for food. You know, wine, it'll do whatever that does for people and give them a merry heart or whatever. But money, you know, you can kind of, if you have that, whatever it is to make you feel better, whether it be, you know, buying a nicer house, whether it be buying a nice car, taking a vacation or whatever, you know, you can kind of choose what you need to make you happy in that situation. So I could be missing something there. I don't know if there's some great knowledge or nugget of truth that we're supposed to get from that, or it kind of sounds just like a statement of fact. And so it's like, you know, if somebody was going to give you a great feast, you know, or the cash value for that feast, what would you rather have? Well, probably the cash value, because typically I'm fed just fine. I would probably enjoy expenses going to something I don't normally get, you know. So, you know, that would be me. But again, if I was really hungry, it's like, well, hey, if you give me the money, it's going right for food. So just go ahead and do the feast. So I think that's kind of the point of that. But verse 20 says, curse not the king, know not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber, for a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. This right here is prophetic of Twitter, is what we're seeing right there. And basically what he's saying is we need to be careful saying things that can get us in trouble. And even if you think you're in a safe space. And let me just say, this almost is prophetic of social media, cell phones, and things like that. Often we think we are in safe spaces. We think we are somewhere where we can talk about somebody, but the reality is, you know, if you're saying something that could get you in trouble, there's a good chance it will get you in trouble. You know why? Because there's spies everywhere. You know, people have big mouths. Sometimes, too, there's people present that you don't realize are present. I mean, have you ever been in that situation before where you were talking about somebody and then all of a sudden you realized they could hear what you were saying? I remember that happened one time when I was a kid. That was embarrassing. I remember one time at my job, fortunately, I was not a participant in this, but I was standing there when it happened, where there was a few of us working there, and this one guy, he was the factory gossip. He comes riding into our area, and then just like pulls up in our area and just like announces to a group of us about this one individual that tattled on somebody and got him written up and all this kind of stuff. And he did not realize the person he was telling us all about was standing there where he couldn't see him. And he heard him say it. And he got really upset. And then it turned into a big ugly thing. And that guy went and tattled on him. And then he got written up. It was hilarious. I mean, it was so much drama at work that day. I mean, it was a very entertaining day that day, I remember. But again, he thought he was in a safe space when he was saying something that could potentially get him in trouble. And you know what? What he said got him in trouble. And so again, when you're cursing the king, just understand, if you're in a situation in a government where that king can do you great harm, you better watch it. Just, you know what? Sometimes you just got to keep your mouth shut. You might think that person you're sending a text to, it's safe. Have you ever accidentally sent a text to the wrong person? Okay? Listen, that's a good reminder when that happens. Fortunately, I just did it the other day, but thankfully it wasn't anything incriminating. I was texting like 3 people at the same time, and I sent somebody the wrong text, and then he sent me another text like he did not understand what I was communicating to him. And it was because the text I sent him was supposed to be going to my wife, and it was just, but thankfully I wasn't talking about anything bad. Otherwise, that would have been really embarrassing. So we all need to think about that. We always need to just have this attitude. And let me tell you something. I mean, my attitude, after some time getting mixed up with a really weird crowd, it helped me develop this policy. When I speak to anybody on email, messenger, text, I just assume there's going to be screenshots published to the whole world. And I just don't say stuff to people that I don't want being published to the whole world. Because there's always a goofball out there that's going to want to expose you, or later they might get mad at you. And you might think the things you're saying are private, but they're probably not going to be private. And let me tell you, that's more true today with the way that we communicate than it was back then. Back then, it was just hearsay. And you could say, oh, they heard wrong, or it was a misunderstanding or something like that. Now, everybody can just see it right there. And we've all seen that kind of thing. And so you know what? Just have the attitude, hey, I'm not going to communicate negatively about me. I'm just not going to say things that could potentially get me in trouble. You know why? Because it probably will. It probably will get you in trouble. And so wisdom will just tell us don't do it. I want to say this, but I'm not going to say it. The chances are it's going to get to somebody I don't want it getting to. And so throughout this chapter, it's basically just showing a lot of contrast between the wise and the foolish. That wise person, they've probably got something negative to say, but there's like, I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut on this one, because I understand how things can get out there. I can understand maybe you too how things can be taken the wrong way. But that fool, they just don't care. I don't care. I speak my mind and I'm not sorry. Well, that just shows really how dumb you are, because you should be sorry. This is causing a lot of problems. And and thankfully over the years at this church, I've not had to deal with much of this. I think part of it is because we don't have a Christian school, and so we're not around each other every day. When you go to a church where you have a Christian school, you are around church people 7 days a week. 7 days a week. There is going to be so much more drama in that situation. When you have sports programs and volleyball and basketball in school, the drama is just off the charts. It really is. And I remember sometimes, even as an assistant pastor, I just felt like I was always having to play these games of who said what about who. It was just, boy, that's why I'm bald. That's why I'm bald. It stopped when I started pastoring. It was all that other stuff. It'll drive you crazy. It really will. And you just it's like, hey, and you wouldn't say this, but I would just sometimes just want to look at these women and just say, can you please just learn to shut up? Please, just take a week off. Give your mouth a break for 1 week so I can have a break. I never said that to anybody, but I thought it. I thought it a few times, because it's always going to come back. It always does. And so we need to choose wisdom. We need to keep wisdom at our right hand. It needs to be the focal point. Make it a priority. Wisdom will benefit you in every area of life. Folly will hurt you. It will cause you grief. It will cause grief for other people. Always choose wisdom. So with that, let's pray, dear Lord. Thank you so much for this chapter. I pray, Lord, you'll help us take all these things to heart. I pray, Lord, you'll help all of us to just value wisdom like we would a treasure. Help us to realize the importance of it, the amount of pain and sorrow and grief we can avoid if we'll just prioritize wisdom in our lives. And I pray you'll help us to take these specific principles that are in these chapters, and I pray that they'll be in our hearts as we go on. We'll remember them whenever we're tempted to maybe give into the flesh and make some foolish decisions. I pray this will be a deterrent for everyone. In your name we pray. Amen.